magicians, masterminds of the social force of gravitation. I discovered their powers when I began teaching swim lessons at the YMCA. Part of my job is to teach water safety and skills and to foster social-emotional learning for the kids. I felt confident about my ability to teach skills such as backfloating or kicking, but I wasn't sure about my ability to foster social-emotional learning in mere 40-minute classes. Should I act extra energetic? Do I need to plan special activities to keep them entertained? What if they don't feel like trying or talking with anyone? During my classes, I work with one child at a time, leaving 3 others on the wall to themselves, under lifeguard supervision, of course. And while I don't hear everything they say, I do overhear bits of conversation that go along the lines of, "Did you know that tiger sharks can eat other sharks? I love tiger sharks. Hey, let's all be under the water and look at each other through our goggles. I learned about adding at school today. Oh yeah, well, I learned that last year." While not every student was gregarious, many of them bonded instantly and became close friends. Our lessons were less like 40-minute instructional periods and more like fun learning time with friends. It was shockingly easy to create this community of fun and learning and took no extra effort on my part to get these kids interested in each other. These kids naturally gravitated towards each other, fearless of the consequences of initiating connections. Reflecting back on this, I realized that as a teen who has interacted with other teens, I had based my expectations for my students off the fact that we don't like to go first. Let me explain. Before my instructor certification, I had to become lifeguard certified. When I first came to the training, I felt immediately intimidated by all the professional-looking people there. After around 2 hours, we took a lunch break. We all sat down, opened our lunches, and pretended we were too busy on our phones to talk to each other. Around 5 minutes was spent side-glancing, waiting for someone to just say something. It took me around 3 minutes to muster up the courage to ask everyone how they felt about the training. We built up slow conversation, and by the end of the training, we had actually become close friends. We even have a group chat that we all regularly update today about work and how we're feeling. I don't take credit for bringing the group together. I'm sure at some point we would have begun to start talking to each other. But I do wonder how much longer we would have sat there in silence if I hadn't said anything. The kids in my classes were far more sociable than the teens I've interacted with, at first. We still form bonds and relationships, it just takes us a lot longer to do so. Kids naturally gravitate towards each other, while we tend to sort of shuffle around until connection becomes natural. So what exactly accounts for this difference in social interactions between your average 5-year-old and your average teenager? Well, a large part of this has to do with competition, mainly our perception of it. You see, as kids, we didn't feel any sort of pressure to perform our best all the time because kids aren't yet trained to be hyper-aware of the surroundings of their peers' opinions of them. Swim lessons are for learning, not competing. For teens and adults, however, most social situations come with some sort of pressure. We've learned to really care about how our peers and our surroundings view us. This is especially true in our competitive environment in the Bay Area. For us, we tend to hesitate to be the first to speak out because we fear these negative opinions of others if we mess up. We don't like saying the wrong thing, so we don't say anything at all. There's something else at play here, though. We can attribute this to normative social influence. This is how we change our behaviors to adapt to social norms in order to fit in with our groups and avoid rejection. We don't like feeling out of place in our surroundings, so we retreat to what we know to be safe based on the standards of the group. Let's look at an example. In 1951, social psychologist Solomon Asch performed a test study to measure these levels of conformity. He invited 5 fake participants and 1 real participant into a study room, the real participant not knowing about the setup. He then showed slides with lines of different lengths, 1 original line and a bunch of lines to match that line too. He then asked each of the participants to go around matching the lines. We can clearly see that line 1 matches the original, while line 3 does not. However, Asch found that if each of those 5 fake participants went around claiming line 3 was the same as line 1, the real participant had a 33% chance of agreeing with this wrong answer. This fear of diverging from the norm, of choosing line 3 instead of line 1, was so strong that real participant couldn't resist agreeing with it 1/3 of the time. We can tell that, based on a participant messing up on something as simple as matching lines, we can see that this pressure to conform is strong. As we succumb to these social norms, we initiate what I like to call the cue cycle. But first, let's establish what social cues are. Social cues impact our interactions with others. They guide how we interact with people. Have you ever purposefully worn earbuds to tell the people around you you aren't interested in talking to them? If so, you've successfully utilized social cues. Social cues are everywhere, whether we're aware of them or not. Other people's facial expressions, body language, and location impact our actions at all times. Think of how when you approach a crosswalk and you already see a group of people clustered there, you tend to refrain from pressing the button because that cue of people standing there has indicated to you you don't need to press it. They already have. We can combine these ideas of social cues and normative social influence. Remember, that's how we change our behaviors to adapt to norms, to create the cue cycle. It goes something like this. We first enter an environment in which we are unsure of our surroundings. We don't know how people view us. We look around for cues, and in our context, cues that would indicate that people want to have conversations and connections with us. In the absence of these cues, we tend to default to safe actions. We retreat to what we know to be safe based on the group. When we do this, we send out cues to others indicating that we want to follow the norm. We don't want to connect. We want to stay to ourselves. And when we send out these cues, it makes other people retreat to their safe actions, default to the social norms. This cycle of sending and receiving cues continues until someone becomes the first to break it. I want to focus especially on this last part of the cycle, when we reinforce the safe action. We can use a term called pluralistic ignorance to explain this concept. Pluralistic ignorance is when we internally reject a norm, but externally follow it because it's what we believe that others want. When we make assumptions about the opinions of others, which are usually false, we tend to be the first to hesitate to go against it. In the case of my experience with the lifeguard trainees, we were pluralistically ignorant about the fact that nobody wanted to speak to each other. In other cases, it could be that since everyone is walking in one direction, they all have to know where they're going, or since everyone understood this really complicated lecture except for you. For kids who aren't as cognizant of these social norms and who don't really pick up on those social cues as easily as we do, the cue cycle never starts for them. There's no pluralistic ignorance hinting at them that their interests differ from the interests of their peers. They're open and social, they connect and share knowledge, sometimes too much knowledge, and they form bonds. So if this fear is preventing us from connecting, why does it even exist? Well, ironically, our fear of diverging from the norm is actually what brought us together in the first place. Let's take a look back into our history of our fear of going first. Joe Keohane, a journalist for the New York Times, recently wrote The Power of Strangers. In this book, he looks into modern psychological research into human behaviors and how we interact with strangers, especially focusing on how we've evolved to form complex societies over millions of years. Around 1.5 million years ago, during the times of Homo erectus, our survival depended on our ability to form bonds with others. Fighting off lions is far easier with a group of 20 than it is alone. Because our survival literally depended on our ability to form bonds with others, we've evolved to naturally want to belong to groups. Wrong, unacceptable behaviors led the group to void our membership, render us as subhuman, have us vomited out of the we and into a likely oblivion. We evolved to care about how people around us view us, because getting rejected will lead us to be fending for ourselves. Of course, in modern society, rejection does not mean death. It just leads to isolation and the loss of connections. I'm not saying we all need to act like children again, telling endless stories, challenging people to staring contests, or letting everyone know we learned about the integrals today at school. In fact, how we've evolved to be aware of social norms has actually helped us maintain respect and status in our societies today. It makes sure we know not to do unacceptable behaviors such as acting violent or shouting in the middle of a theater. The problem is that this fear often prevents us from reaching out at all. When we fear being the first to diverge from norms, we don't reach out and connect. And when we don't reach out and connect, we can never truly become parts of a whole. So defy this instinct. Diverge from social norms. Break the cue cycle. Go first, because when you do, the possibilities are endless. Thank you.